Good afternoon, everyone. This is Annette Manius with Oasis Solutions, and we appreciate you joining us today. I have myself and also Garen Stout is with me with Oasis, and we will be facilitating our session today, which is Sage 100 Accounts Payable and Bank Reconciliation Tips and Tricks. So this session has been recorded. So some of you all, I see on the list, have been customers of ours for a very long time and have been on a lot of the other webinars we've had. So I'm happy to say and sad to say that Pam Scott, who normally does our webinars and who recorded this webinar for us, has retired from Oasis. So she was with us for 25 years. So we appreciate that she would want to go on to Pam 2.0. But she was kind enough to actually do these videos for us through the end of the year. So just wanted to let you all know that this is recorded, but Garen and I are here so that if you have questions, make sure that you put it into the question answer chat box, and we will answer those questions as we at the end of the session. So hope you enjoy, and let us know if you have questions or if you need some follow-up at the end. Thank you.
The Accounts Payable and Bank Reconciliation module. This particular session is pre-recorded. However, you do have the opportunity to ask questions during the presentation, and those will all be addressed. There will be a follow-up with each individual after the presentation is over. So please feel free to type in questions because those will be monitored during the presentation. And if you have any follow-up questions that you think of after the presentation, you are asked to email Garen Stout at gstout, S-T-O-U-T, at oasisky.com, and she will be glad to get those questions answered for you. So thank you for joining me today. And we're going to start out with accounts payable. And this session is based upon a lot of common questions that we get into our support department, maybe questions that we get at year end, and so forth. So a couple of things that we're going to talk about is we're going to start in the accounts payable module. We're going to go into setup and we're going to go to accounts payable options. And under the main tab, I wanted to show you the aging categories. A lot of people want to change how their aging report runs, and you can do that by changing your aging categories. So by default, when you set up Sage 100 and start a new company, the aging category is set to days, and it defaults to 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. But you can change those aging categories if you want to. So if you wanted to maybe make it 15, 30, 45, and 60 days, then once you make these changes and you click accept, when you run your aging report, this is how it's going to age your invoices. So it's up to you on how you want to run those invoices. And you'll notice that you have a drop down here for the category to age invoices. You also have the option of aging by month. But you'll notice when I change it to month, it sets it to 1, 2, 3, and 4 months, and these fields are grayed out, so I cannot change this. So most everybody that I know uses days, and then they set up the categories. And this is company specific, so you can change it. You can have different aging categories per company within Sage 100. The other thing that we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes is tracking 1099 information. And the important thing to know is you can track 1099 information in your Sage 100. There's no reason that you have to do it manually outside of Sage. There's no reason that you should ever have to purchase additional software to manage your 1099s. It all can be done within Sage. And the first step to tracking 1099 history is to have this box checked. If this isn't checked, then it assumes you don't want to track the history. And therefore, the 1099 box doesn't even show up in vendor maintenance. So we're going to go take a look at this in just a moment and talk about tracking 1099 history, some really important information about new features starting in the calendar year of 2020, and how you can manage your 1099s if you have a bunch of old or bad history in there. So again, this checkbox is the first thing that you want to make sure is taken care of. So I'm going to click accept, and we're going to just go up to vendor maintenance, and I'm going to grab a vendor. In vendor maintenance on the additional tab, this is where the 1099 information is stored. If this box is completely blank, then it means you do not have the feature turned on in the setup options. So on 1099 forms, you can say whether the type is none, which means this person doesn't get a 1099 at all. You can say if they're a business. If they're a business, you'll notice that it asks for their taxpayer ID number. You want to make sure that you fill that in, because that is going to print on their 1099 form. That's where it pulls this information from. And then you also have if they're an individual, and you'll notice that it changes it from taxpayer ID to social security number. So just make sure you have the appropriate vendor type. And then the following forms are supported within Sage 100. So we have miscellaneous, interest and dividend. Those three have been there as long as I can remember. And then a fourth form was added in the calendar year of 2020 for non-employee compensation. So basically what this 1099 NEC form does is previously under miscellaneous, box 7 on the miscellaneous form was for non-employee compensation, and they have removed that from the miscellaneous form and created the 1099 NEC form. So the miscellaneous form is still applicable for things like rent and so forth, but if it's non-employee compensation, it now has to be reported on the non-employee compensation form. Now, if you go into your Sage and you look and you do not have this fourth option, there are a couple of reasons why you may not be seeing it. Number one, the patch from Sage just became available in 2020, and you would have had to have had a patch installed at the end of the year in order to have this non-employee compensation show up. We would have run a utility so that it goes in and it looks at your miscellaneous form. We're just going to pull this history up. So it's going to look at your miscellaneous form box 7. And if you had any history in this box, it's automatically going to move it to the non-employee compensation into box 1. So it's going to do all of that for you with that utility. This year-end patch or interim release download was only available for supported versions. And those supported versions are the 2018, 2019, and 2020. So that is also translates into the versions 6.0, 6.1, and 6.2 versions. If you are on version 2017 or prior, you do not have this option available to you because you are on you're running a retired version. So you need to get in touch with us so that we can get an upgrade scheduled for you. So, so anyway, I mentioned that if you don't have this and you're on a supported version, we do need to install that patch, and we need to run that utility. But I want to give a warning about the utility. That utility should only be run once. So if you run the utility yourself and then you forget and you run it again, it will distort your 1099 history. So you want to make sure that it is only being run one time. So we talked about Social Security number versus taxpayer ID. Whenever you set up a 1099, it's going to default to box 1, regardless of which form you pick. So you want to make sure that you are picking the proper box for this miscellaneous form. And there's a lot of boxes there. The definitions change sometimes. And if you're not sure what box to pick, then I would click on this 1099 history button, and looking at the miscellaneous form, you can see the definition of all of those boxes. So there's miscellaneous. If I look at interest, you can see the definition of those. And if the IRS adds box numbers, if they change box numbers around, if they change descriptions, that would be, Sage will issue a patch at the end of the applicable year so that your 1099 options and boxes are correct. Again, if you're not running a supported version, you're not going to be able to make those changes. So I just want to make you aware of that. Now, let me step back one second. I did say that this session is pre-recorded, and the supported versions, I listed those. Probably by the time of this webinar, the 2021 version will have been released. And if that is the case, then the supported versions are 2019, 2020, and 2021. 2018 is going to roll off of that. So keep that in mind, that Sage supports the current version and 2 prior versions. So as soon as 2021 is released, that 2018 version is going to be retired, and Sage will no longer be providing any patches, fixes, year-end updates. They will not provide technical support to you or to Oasis on your behalf. So please keep that in mind. And if you are needing to upgrade your Sage, or you want to talk to someone to see if you should be upgrading your Sage, please feel free to reach out to Garen Stout. And again, her email is gstout@oasisky.com. All right. So in talking about the 1099s, so let's say that over the years, there's been a lot of changes in your AP department. You track your 1099 information, but it's kind of a mess. It's never been purged out. Sage still thinks it's the 1099 year of 2012, and you kind of need to clean things up. Our support team can assist with that in getting the old data purged, getting things up to date, and helping you run reports and so forth to determine what the proper numbers are for your 1099 history. And you can easily overwrite that number there by literally typing in what the number should be. And this is what has been paid year to date. This does not include any invoices that are open invoices that have not been paid. But once you get this correct, then as you pay those invoices, it's going to add to this year to date total, and it will go in the proper box. So occasionally when I ask clients if they print 1099s, they're like, no, it's just never worked for us. And probably it's because the data has not been properly purged. Maybe the vendors are not set up properly. And again, our tech support team can certainly help you get all of that straightened out. This is a good time to start working on that as a project so that at the end of 2021, you're ready to go and get those forms printed through your Sage 100. So if you have any questions about that, just reach out to our team and they will be glad to address that for you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close out of this screen. And one thing that I always touch on, because we get this question a lot after the first of the year when folks are going through audits, and the question is, the auditor will run the aged invoice report, and this report does not tie in dollar for dollar into the general ledger AP account. And I want to explain to you why that may happen and what report should tie in to the general ledger. So the aged invoice report is based on the invoice date. So because of how your invoices may be dated, it may not tie directly to the general ledger. However, the AP trial balance report, that trial balance is based on the posting date. The posting date is the GL posting date, and the AP trial balance, if you're comparing apples to apples, 12/31 of 2021, 12/31 of 2021, your AP account versus your AP trial balance, versus your general ledger AP account, those should tie together. If they do not tie, then you do have an issue somewhere. And more than likely, you can go through and run a GL detail report on that account, or by looking at the trial balance in the general ledger, you may see that somebody did a journal entry, maybe to write off invoices instead of doing it properly through accounts payable. So there's various reasons as to why that may be why they may not tie, and then you need to research and find out and then get that fixed. So again, that's real important, and you'll have the same thing with accounts receivable. That follows the same philosophy. So again, aged invoice date is based on the the aged invoice report is based on the invoice date, and the AP trial balance is based on the GL posting date. So if you entered an invoice with a date of 5/31, but you didn't post it until 6/3, you can see how there might be a difference there. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about is I want to go back to our setup, and I want to make you aware of a feature that was added a few versions ago, which is an expense distribution table. And what this allows you to do is to create a distribution table that you can assign to a vendor. So let's say that your utility bill gets broken out amongst 15 different departments. And, maybe some departments pay 10%, they're allocated to, the expenses 10%, some may be 5%, some may be 20%. So what you can do is you can set up a table, and I would recommend giving the table some type of a code that maybe is easy to understand what it is. So, for instance, you could give it a numeric value, 0002, but then are you going to remember what that is? If it's utility, maybe you use something like UTIL, and the description is utilities. So then what you're going to do is you're going to go down to the GL account, and you are going to, and I'm just going to grab some things here, we'll grab these utilities. So here are my I've got 4 different departments that have a GL account number for utilities. And let's just say we're going to break those out evenly, that they're 25% each. I'm going to grab each account number, and I'm going to say, okay, they get 25% of the bill. Whoops. And sorry about that. It's not letting me do the lookup the way I wanted to. So we'll just go back and do it this way. And let's say this one gets 25% as well. And my third one. And we'll select my fourth one. And again, it doesn't have to be, you know, if you have 4, it doesn't have to be, you know, broken out. This one could have, you know, 10%. This one could have 13%. This one could have 25%. And if you'll notice down here at the bottom, the total percentage does have to equal 100%. So let's say that this is how these 3 are broken out, and the last one gets the remaining percentage. I can either just type in what that remaining percentage is, or if I click apply balance on the right, then it just changes that. So you'll notice then that the percentage is 100%, and I'm going to click accept. And then what you can do with that table is in your vendor maintenance, and this may already have one set up. Yeah, it does. But let's say that Airway Property, we were going to use the utility one. So you could change it here. Now you can only have one distribution table per vendor maintenance record, but you can override the table at the invoice level. So you can do that as well. So you're going to put in the default, I guess, what would be most often distribution table. And then if I go in to do an invoice data entry for that particular vendor, you'll notice how it shows the distribution table here. This is where I could override it if this was actually the telephone distribution versus utilities. So you can override that if you need to. I'm going to put in my invoice amount, just like normal. I'm going to make sure my terms are correct. It's going to automatically calculate my due date based on the invoice date and whatever my terms are. If you do give discounts, you know, all of that's set up, and it's going to know how to put in that discount information. When I go to my lines tab, it automatically populates it with those GL account numbers and breaks out that expense. Now, if for any reason on this particular invoice you needed those amounts to be modified, you can very easily change those. Or if on this particular invoice it was not going to be expensed to this 4th account, instead of modifying your table, you can just go in and delete it from here. And then you can just add the amount of whatever you need to be on another line. So anyway, you can go through that. Again, you know, it's going to have to equal my $200. So we'll go ahead and just add this one back, just for the heck of it. Whoops, and I need to add $8 more, so we're just going to put $8 there. Okay. And I actually have not done the correct total, but you can see from this example how you can make those changes, how you can remove a line. You could add a line as well. If this needed an additional expense line for whatever reason, you could add that as well. Okay? All right. So you just have to make sure that your total here equals what, whoops, I thought I grabbed a GL account, but apparently I didn't. Okay. Oh, I see what it did. So your total here has to equal your total here, or it will not allow you to accept this invoice. So I'm going to go ahead and just click accept. So again, you do not have to utilize these distribution tables, but it is certainly something there that if you're breaking out amongst lots and lots of departments, that it is going to help you not have to type in all of those every single time. So again, if you have any questions about that, or you would like for someone to assist you with helping get that set up, please let our team know, and we will be more than glad to help you with that. So the next thing that I would like to talk about, and bear with me one second. Okay. The next thing that I would like to talk about is the how to adjust an invoice in Sage 100. So you've got an invoice that's been posted, and you need to make an adjustment to it. Maybe you made a typo and you put in the invoice for a certain amount, and it should have been for a different amount, maybe more, maybe less. So instead of creating a brand new invoice for the difference, you can adjust invoices within Sage 100 very easily, and you're able to track what has happened to that invoice. So I'm going to just pull up my first vendor here, and I'm going to show you what invoice we're going to look at today. So invoice number 12345 is for $100. And let's say that I made a typo when I put that invoice in, and that invoice should have actually been for $1,000 instead of $100. I caught my mistake. I've already updated this. So instead of, getting rid of this invoice, adjusting it completely out and redoing it, I can do an adjustment to this existing invoice. So what you're going to do is you're going to go into Invoice Data Entry. You're going to select the appropriate vendor. You're going to type in the original invoice number. And as soon as I do the original invoice number, it's going to pop up kind of a warning message and say this invoice is already on file. And I have three options here. Hold payment for invoice, produce a separate check for invoice. These are features that are in Sage. If you needed to put an invoice on hold, maybe the merchandise was damaged and you've been told, hey, we're having a problem with this vendor, we don't want to pay them anything, you can put an invoice on hold, and then when you do the invoice payment selection, it doesn't select them for payment. You could also select this invoice for separate check. And what that means is when you do your invoice payment selection, when it selects this invoice 12345, it'll actually cut a separate check for just this one invoice. If you had 10 invoices due for this vendor, it would put, and this one is the only one set to separate check, then it would cut two checks, one for this invoice and then a separate check for the other 9 invoices. This feature right here, I know I'm getting off topic a little bit, but I just wanted to tell you about it. This feature right here is what you would use if you have already entered the invoice and posted it in Sage. These two options, you may have not noticed it before, but you can also do that in the invoice data entry screen. So as you're entering an invoice, you could say whether it gets separate payment, separate check, or if it's a hold payment. What we are doing is we are adjusting the invoice. So I want to show you something. If you'll notice this invoice amount right here. So this adjust button, this is what I'm going to click because I want to adjust this invoice. So I can click adjust. And you'll notice that it changed this field to say adjustment amount. Now, this is where it's very critical and important that you remember what adjustment amount means, because I've had clients get confused, and then it makes a bigger mess of the invoice. So the adjustment amount, you're going to enter the amount of the change. So if I originally entered the invoice in as $100 and it should have been $1,000, my adjustment amount is going to be a positive $900. If I said the adjustment amount was $1,000, then it's going to add $1,000 to the $100 that's already there and think that the invoice total is $1,100. So hopefully that makes sense. If I'm reducing the amount of the invoice, so let's say for an example, the invoice, I keyed it in for $100 and it should have been for $50, then this adjustment amount would be a negative $50 because I'm reducing that invoice by $50. So, but in this scenario, I want my invoice should have been $1,000. So I'm going to make this adjustment amount for $900. It's going to put in the invoice date, posting date. I'm going to go to my lines tab. You'll notice that it pulled in my distribution table. Obviously, you would want to make sure you're using the same, the appropriate GL accounts. For demo purposes, I'm just going to accept what's there. So I'm going to click accept. And I'm just going to run through very quickly and update the invoice. And my demo data is in a future date, so we're going to just go ahead. I'm going to just preview these and update them. Okay, there is that report. Do you want to update it? Yes. And we won't do the daily transaction register just yet. So what I want to do is show you now what that invoice is going to look like on that vendor. So here's invoice 12345, and it now shows that that invoice is for $1,000 and the balance is $1,000 because it wasn't paid. If I click on this invoice, you're going to see the history. So you're going to see where I originally entered the invoice for $100. You're going to see where I did a separate transaction of an adjustment for $900. So a lot of times we see people wanting to do negative invoices or various things. You know, if it's just better to have everything tied in together. That way you have a good audit trail of what has happened. If I go over to my transactions tab, you can see both everything related to that invoice listed here. So you can see the original invoice, you can see the adjustment that I made, and when I pay that invoice, you're going to see that listed there as well. So I did want to go through and show you how to adjust an invoice. And again, the key thing to remember is that you use the original invoice number. It's going to recognize that that invoice is already on file. You're going to click your adjust button, and the adjustment amount is whatever you're adding to or deducting from the original transaction amount. Okay? So if you need assistance ever in adjusting an AP invoice, please reach out to our team. And as always, we will be more than glad to help you and to go through this. I will follow up by saying, as most of you know, but it may be your first webinar with Oasis, following this presentation, you will receive an email within a couple of days, and it will include a link to the recording of this webinar. So please feel free to share that recording with other members of your team. You know, keep it as a reference if you need to go back in 3 months because you can't remember how to adjust an invoice, and you can always review this session again. All right, So wanted to talk to you about that. And wanted to mention just kind of briefly selecting invoices for payment. There's various ways that you can do this. So I just want to kind of show you a couple of different ways that you can select invoices for payment. So I'm going to go into the invoice payment selection. And you have your scenario here, select invoices by due date only. You could do it by discount date only. If you do have vendors that give you discounts and you don't want to miss those, you can do it by invoice and discount due date. And then you're going to put in the invoice due date. And I know that I'm working in the future here in my demo data. So I'm going to just put in a different date here just so that include electronic payment vendors. I'm going to assume that you would want to do that. As you should know, that Sage 100 does support electronic payment. You can set up ACH and pay your vendors electronically. So you can do an invoice payment selection, and it can include invoices that are to be paid electronically and invoices that you are going to cut checks for and go through that whole process. I'm going to just say no to this so that it doesn't mess anything up during this demo. So once I have this information and my selection created, if you notice my clear button down here is grayed out. So this indicates that there's not an existing selection has already been made. I'm going to click my select button, or actually, excuse me, I could click proceed, and anything that falls into this category is going to get selected for payment. You can print a report, and then you can remove invoices if you don't want to pay them. Here's what I like to do, is I like to go into the select button, and then it lists all of the invoices that are due. It also lists the invoice amount. So if I had clicked the proceed button based on my criteria, all of these invoices would have been selected for payment. So let's say that your supervisor takes a look at your AP aging and they tell you which invoices can be paid this week. So maybe you're not going to be able to pay everything that's due, but they are going to say, okay, I want you to, these are the 10 invoices that we can pay this week. If you have that report and what they want to pay, you notice the total selected down here says 0. You can go through and check which invoices you want to pay. Let me make that screen bigger so we can see everything. So if I hold my control key down, I can go and you can see I can select individual invoices for payment. And I was just looking here wondering what the monthly drinking invoice was for, but anyway, so we can go through and select these invoices. And if you notice while I'm selecting those, it gives you a total down here. So maybe you're in a scenario where your supervisor says, pay who you can, but we can't spend more than $10,000 this month. Then you could go through and you could add invoices and make sure that you don't go over. Actually, we're going to undo that one by clicking on it. We probably want to pay the IRS. So we're real close here to our $1,000 or $10,000. So I'm going to click OK. And when I do, only the invoices that are highlighted are going to be selected for payment. If I want to clear this selection, I can click this little button right here, unselect all invoices. If I wanted to select everything, I can click this checkbox and select all of my invoices. All right, I'm just going to check that. And again, I'm just going to go through and grab a few of these. Okay, whoops. So I went over a little bit. I might, ask my supervisor if it's okay if I go over $13. So anyway, once you've made your selection, you're going to click OK. And now it has selected just those invoices for payment. You'll notice my clear button is in black. So if I tried to make a selection again, so if I just exit out of here and I forget to cut my checks and I forget what I've done, if I go back into my invoice payment selection and I go in and put in those dates again, and so you'll notice here, I already have a selection. If I click the select button, it is only going to show the invoices that have not been selected. Okay, so you'll notice this list is shorter because there's already something that's been selected. If you're like, well, I don't remember what I selected, I just want to start from scratch, just click this clear button. As long as you haven't cut the checks, click the clear button. Do you want to clear the selection? I'm going to say yes. I'll put in my dates again. Go to select, and you'll notice there's the full list again. So again, then I can go through and select whichever ones that I want. And at that point, once I've made my selection, and I can then print out that list, and basically that's going to show me what I selected, and then I'm ready to go ahead and cut my checks. So there's no right or wrong way to select those invoices. You want to make sure that you just do whatever works best for you, and depending on your company's individual scenario. So we do have questions, or didn't want to cover that. And the next thing that I want to talk about is we're going to go ahead and move to the bank reconciliation module. And kind of want to start this, and the reason I wanted to talk about bank rec just a little bit is very frequently when I talk with clients, they do not utilize the bank reconciliation module. They're managing things externally on a spreadsheet. And there may be some rare instances where that would be your best option, based on based on the functionality within Sage, but it should be very rare. The bank reconciliation module integrates with any modules where you are doing anything that affects bank account. So basically your AP checks, if you have the payroll module and you're cutting AP check or payroll checks, excuse me, if you use accounts receivable and you're doing cash receipt entry, those are going to hit the bank rec if you have it integrated. In the general ledger, you can, if you do transaction journal entries, you can also have those hit bank rec. General journal entries do not hit bank rec, but transaction journal entries do. So there's really no reason why you should not be able to use the bank reconciliation. And a lot of times we'll get comments that will say, well, there's history in there from 20 years ago, and it would take me forever to get it reconciled and cleaned up because we've just never really used it. We would treat that situation as if you were brand new to Sage 100. We can clear out all of the old bank rec information. It's not going to affect any of your other modules. We're just purging, getting rid of the history in bank rec. we would have you go through and enter any outstanding transactions. So from your last bank balance or bank statement, excuse me, and anything that's happened since that last bank statement, and go through, and we would enter those into the screen, so that basically you're starting with a blank slate. You're going to manually enter any outstanding transactions, and with that, entering that information directly in BankRec is not going to affect any other modules at all. So we can get it set up, we can get it reconciled, we can train you on how to do that reconciliation and what you need to do month after month. So don't let that, you know, that there's just old history in there and you think it would just take way too long to get it cleaned up. We can assist with that and make it a very easy process for you. And we'll discuss with you any unique scenarios that you have related to BankRec to confirm that the Sage 100 bank reconciliation will work for you before we, you know, have you go through all of the services and getting everything cleaned up. So we're glad to work with you on that and to see if this will work for you. And the final thing that I wanted to talk about in BankRec is just to make you aware that the newer versions, probably starting about 4 to 5 years ago, they added the positive pay feature, excuse me, to Sage 100. And positive pay is basically like, it helps to detect fraud on your bank account. So when you're cutting your AP checks, when you're cutting your payroll checks, you can upload a positive pay file to your bank that lets them know what checks you have cut. And then if anything tries to clear on your account that's not on that positive pay list, it will catch it. So it's going to catch it at that point versus the check gets cashed and you catch it on your bank reconciliation, or your account is overdrawn and your bank calls you. If you want to set up positive pay, the first steps would be to check with your bank to make sure they support positive pay. And I'm not aware of any banks at this point that don't. You may check with them also to see if they have a fee. A lot of banks will let you do positive pay manually online, so you log into their system and key in all of your checks. But the beauty of this feature is that Sage creates that file for you. You can upload it and you're not having to manually rekey every check that you've cut. So you may want to check with that. If you ever do have an instance of fraud on your bank account, your bank is probably going to make it mandatory that you use positive pay. So just keep in mind that you can do that within Sage 100. And we will be glad to help get that set up. So in closing today, I just want to reiterate, if you have questions about this webinar, if you have follow-up questions about, you know, how do I do this, how do I do that, I need someone from support to get in touch with me to help me set up my BankRec. Maybe you're on an older version of Sage and you want to talk to somebody about upgrading. All of those questions should go to Ms. Garen Stout. And again, it's gstout@oasisky.com. And Garen will either answer your questions or she will forward you and escalate the issue to the appropriate person within Oasis, and someone will be getting back with you. So thank you for attending today's session. I hope you found it helpful and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today. We had a couple of questions in the chat, which I answered. So hopefully everyone saw that. There was one question that we're going to have to get back about, is adjusting AP invoices the comment on there, which is an interesting question. So we'll get back with that. And then again, we'll send out the video to everyone later this week. Thank you for attending. See you next time.
Thank you very much.